How can researchers and museum staff join together for successful collaborations? I'm Lauren Myers, Associate Editor of Monograph Matters for the Society for Research in Child Development. Today, I'll be talking to Maureen Callanan and Jenni Martin about their work together for a recent issue of the Monographs for the Society for Research in Child Development. The work is entitled Exploration, Explanation, and Parent-Child Interaction in Museums, and it appears in issue 85.1 of the Monographs for the Society for Research in Child Development. Please visit monographmatters.srcd.org for videos, commentaries, teaching materials, and additional content related to this work. The authors are Callanan, Laguerre, Sobel, Yeager, Letourneau, McHugh, Willard, with Brinkman, Phineas, Rubio, Barnett, Gosa, Martin, Meisner, and Watson. The authors investigated the development of children's developing causal thinking in the context of family interaction at museum exhibits. They focused on explaining and exploring as two fundamental collaborative processes in parent-child interaction during open-ended collaboration at GEAR exhibits. The authors worked with 3 U.S. children's museums: Children's Discovery Museum of San Jose, Thinkery in Austin, Texas, and the Providence Children's Museum. To start, Maureen, could you tell us about some of the main findings you report in the monograph?
Sure. So as you said, Lauren, we were interested in how parents and children explain and explore while they're playing at an exhibit at a museum. In this case, we looked at 3 GEAR exhibits in these 3 museums. And we found, first of all, that children's exploring predicted their causal understanding about gears when we asked them some questions later. Overall, parents' explanations did not predict or correlate with their causal understanding, but we found, I think, the most interesting finding was that this kind of complicated link between explaining and exploring that has to do with timing. So basically, if parents time their explanatory talk, either explanatory question or an explanation, right at the time when the child is beginning to explore on their own, that seemed to lead to deeper exploration for the children, which then, in turn predicted children's understanding. So the timing of parents' explanatory talk seems to be very important in this work.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And turning to Jenni now, what are your top pieces of advice for museum professionals hoping to form a partnership with a researcher?
It's a great question. I want to say that Maureen and I have been collaborating for over 20 years, Children's Discovery Museum in UC Santa Cruz, and it's been a wonderful and mutually beneficial partnership. So that's my first piece of advice. Try to find the mutual benefits. You are talking with a researcher, and then really take the time to build the relationship, talk through each of your goals and hopes and how a partnership might benefit you. And then recognize that both endeavors are valuable. The work that museums do in reaching visitors and the public is incredibly valuable, and the work that researchers do benefiting the knowledge in the field is also incredibly beneficial. So as both parties look at those benefits and keep those in mind, it can help with decisions along the way.
Great, thanks. And to flip to the other perspective, Maureen, what are your top pieces of advice for researchers hoping to form a partnership with a museum?
Well, yeah, as Jenni said, I'm at University of California, Santa Cruz. She's at Children's Discovery Museum, San Jose. We've been working together for quite a long time. And it was partly by chance that we ended up forming this partnership. But I think what's really been important to us, and what I would advise people to think about, and it really mirrors what Jenni said, is to figure out a way that you can have overlapping goals. So for researchers, sometimes we tend to think that we're the ones with the information that we have to transmit or give to other people. But really, museum professionals are professionals who know a lot about development, about developmentally appropriate activities for children, and about how to communicate with the public about science and developmental psychology. So we were able to to really, as Jenni said, talk, get to know each other, figure out what each group's goals are, and then find projects to work on where the goals really were overlapping. I guess my other piece of advice would be keep an open mind and really listen to, because sometimes it won't be obvious. We're using different languages sometimes, and it won't be obvious what those overlapping goals might be. But the more you connect and talk and understand the mission and the goals of the museum, I think as a researcher, you'll start to see ways that you can connect.
Great, that's great advice. Thank you.
I think sometimes museum professionals don't realize the value that they bring in the access to the public that they provide for researchers, and how valuable that really is, as long as you can work together to have that access be natural and comfortable for all of the parties involved. So I think that's an important piece too.
Great, excellent. And turning to the other side of the coin, I know both of you have a lot of collective wisdom on this issue about practical problems. So could you both speak about what are some of the biggest practical problems that have come up through the course of your collaboration?
Would you like to start, Maureen?
Sure. Well, I think one of the first things we realized is that the schedule, the academic schedule and the museum schedule are very, very different. So, just at a very fundamental level, figuring out how do we work with things like when the students who are helping with the research are either doing their exams or on summer break or et cetera, and how sometimes that doesn't work well with the museum schedule. Another big thing we've dealt with is IRB and informed consent, and how to get, appropriately give information for families to give informed consent, but also work within the ways of connecting with visitors that feels comfortable to the museum and its staff. I don't know, Jenni, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, in terms of the scheduling also, we had to learn along the way that sometimes the larger events that the museum is hosting are not the best times for the researchers to be there, even though it might work well with the research schedule, because the admissions area can just feel very full. So one of the other things I think we worked through is what's the best way and what is the best place within the museum for visitors to learn about the fact that we're doing this research, and then to give permission for themselves or their children to participate in the research. So that was a working through process about, again, acknowledging what works well for the researchers, what works well for the museum staff, and what works best for the visitors, and always keeping those things in mind. Some other operational things we've encountered as well. Visitors don't necessarily know the difference between a researcher and a museum staff. They're going to ask either one of them where the bathroom is, or what the special event for the day is, or how to address their lost child situation. So we've made sure along the way to provide orientation for the researchers, and then we also invite the researchers to attend the daily briefing that we do with our floor staff, so that everyone knows these are some of the special things that are going on today. So
yeah, and attending those daily briefings was really helpful, even though it's a very short meeting, just for the floor staff to know who we are and to kind of give them a smile and a welcoming face, because sometimes they were afraid to come near us or think they're not supposed to be in the room where we're recording. So just having that face-to-face contact has been very helpful.
Great.
One other thing I would mention, and Maureen's been a great partner in this, at our museum, we're really committed to reaching out to our local community because our hope is that our visitor demographics match our community demographics. That means that we offer a lot of our signage in 3 different languages. We work hard to ensure that our staff are reflective of community members. And so that's had an interesting challenge in terms of the research and the approval process, the IRB piece that parents are going to be signing when they agree to be a part of the research. So we've worked closely together to ensure that the translations are accessible to visitors. Maureen has worked hard in the way that we do with our staff to ensure that her research team also is reflective of the community. And this has really helped, I think, to ensure that the folks who are agreeing to participate in the research are broadly reflective of our community and our visitor demographics as well.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Maureen. What are some of the major benefits you've found to doing your research as part of a museum partnership?
Well, for me, the museum is a really perfect location for the research because I'm so interested in my work. I'm interested in how children learn through everyday activities and conversations. So in some ways, that's the lucky part, that my research questions are perfect for the museum setting. But beyond that, and I think for other researchers, even when they have different sorts of research questions, I think the diversity and the just the variety of participants that are present and have the opportunity to participate in the research is different at the museum. This particular museum, Children's Discovery Museum, has an extremely diverse visitorship in terms of language and ethnicity and background. One of the things we've found is fathers. It's a lot easier to include fathers in our studies if we do the work at the museum than if we're inviting people to campus or even going to families' homes. It tends to be the moms that agree and participate. But at the museum, there are lots of fathers present, especially on Saturdays, and that's been a really great addition to the research. Another big benefit is that this research has really provided students with incredibly valuable opportunities just to do the research in the museum, which is lots of fun, but also to learn more about other settings where learning happens besides universities or preschools or schools. So students have really enjoyed learning more, both grad students and undergrads. I think several of my grad students have gone on to get jobs that are kind of in that realm of between museums and research. And so that's, of course, been very valuable too. And then just exposure to a whole new knowledge base and a whole new community. So Jenni and I have presented our work, not only at developmental site conferences, but at museum conferences, especially children's museum conferences. And there's a whole community there. And then, educational and learning science kinds of conferences as well. So we've connected with different groups of researchers and practitioners, and that's really, I think, enriched the kinds of research questions we even think about asking in our research.
Those are excellent points. And to flip it again, back to Jenni, what are some of the major benefits you've found to having partners with researchers in your museum?
Yeah, I think that idea of exposure to a new community and a new knowledge base is one of the keys for our museum as well. We really are a learning institution, and we view that not only as learning for children and their families, but the museum staff are constantly learning about how children learn, about how best to offer experiences to visitors that are going to be beneficial for them. And our partnership with Maureen in particular has really allowed us to do some deep dives in the prototyping that we do as we're developing exhibits to understand what seems to be working with visitors, what's compelling, what kinds of conversations are children and their parents having in these science contexts, and how can we support those rich conversations even more fully. And then where have we gone awry? You know, when you develop exhibits, sometimes you think this is going to work, I know it, and then and even those of us on the exhibits team have strong opinions about this is going to work or this isn't. And so we've been able to work with the research team to gather data that can help us say, oh, it is working, or actually it's not. We really need to change this. So that's been incredibly valuable as well. And then we have access through our research partners to the cutting edge information about children's learning and what's emerging in the field that we can then choose to be responsive to in the experiences that we're offering our visitors.
Great. And that kind of goes back to something you were saying earlier too about finding the mutual benefit. So yeah, even as you're in the middle of it, you're still finding unexpected pieces of mutual benefit. So that's a great point.
Very true.
So this will be our last question, and this is a question for both of you. What do you all think is key to a successful research museum partnership?
Should I start, Jenny?
Sure.
I think for me, one of the keys has been being having regular engagement with the team at the museum. So as Jenny mentioned, several of our projects together have involved new exhibitions where the museum team does prototyping and tries out versions of an exhibit out on the floor. We've been able to come in and do some research around those prototypes and then give quick feedback to the designers so they can make changes. And throughout that process, I was a member of the team. We were meeting every 2 weeks, and we were really checking in frequently. And sometimes those meetings wouldn't be very relevant to the research, but I think being there was really important because I got to know the people involved. I got to know the goals of the team. It just provided, I got to see cases where I could say, well, actually, I know about some research I could point you to on that question. So we really started to form that connection and those ways of, you know, being open and being ready for the unexpected, and then working together. So I think it comes back to, as you said, Lauren, it comes back to the overlapping goals again, that we having constant contact or regular contact, not constant, but regular, allows us to see those opportunities where we can support one another and both, you know, gain from the relationship.
Yeah, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of building a strong relationship that is also built on mutual respect for the expertise that each group brings to the situation, and honoring and acknowledging the benefits of each of those situations. I think Maureen has been incredible about just honoring what the museum is offering to the public, and it's made all the difference, I think, in helping us work through when there have been challenges along the way. The other thing that I think has really been important is knowing that we each are going to be making decisions about the area that does matter most to us. Right. And so when we can honor those things, that's been really helpful. So I remember a time when we had created a prototype and Maureen's team had done some research on it. And in one of these team meetings where Maureen was present, the exhibits group decided that that prototype was not going to be included in the final exhibit. And that was especially difficult for the research team because one of the grad students was doing a major piece of her doctoral research on that particular topic. And so we were able, you know, as Maureen and her team brought that up, we were able to say, okay, we're not going to include this experience in the final exhibit. However, we can keep that prototype out on the exhibit floor longer so that the graduate student can gather enough data for it to be relevant for the work that she's doing. And that's okay. It wasn't a problem for the museum to do that in the long run. And it allowed Maureen to say, okay, I don't need to push on having that exhibit in the exhibit ultimately, as long as we can gather the data we need. So that was an area where we both were able to get what we needed by realizing why we're both in it.
It's such a great example, Jenny, because the cases I've heard of researchers who have problems working with museums, that's the kind of thing that could really lead to conflict and disrespect, or, you know, feeling like not respected in some ways. But just the fact that we were all there at the table and could work out that compromise is why I think that that kind of regular contact is so important.
Really key. I agree. And I think the other thing that we've been able to do over time is to sort of, again, because we're in a regular dialogue, to say, oh, you know, one of the things from the museum that we've been sort of thinking about and considering is heading in this direction, either wondering why we're not reaching a certain audience, or if we tried something this way, how might visitors respond? And then as we're in that dialogue, you've been able to say to me, Maureen, oh, I've been thinking about this, and there's some research out there that suggests this might be a direction. How could we work together on this effort now, or on this question now?
Right. Yeah.
Great. And thank you for sharing those specific examples too. It's always helpful to have some concrete examples to think through these big issues. So that will be our last question. And I thank the viewer for watching this video. And to learn more, you can read the full monograph entitled Exploration, Explanation, and Parent-Child Interaction in Museums. This monograph is issue 85.1 of the Monographs for the Society for Research and Child Development. Also, for videos, commentaries, teaching materials, and more resources about this work, please visit monographmatters.srcd.org. Thank you. The authors I interviewed today were Maureen Callanan and Jenni Martin. I'm Lauren Myers. All of the images of the children are used by with parent permission, photos taken by the authors and museum staff. And all of the photos were provided by the authors and the museums, and all rights are reserved to them. Thank you.